letting his legs dangle. "I'm coming down there! Watch out for my feet!" Caden lowered himself as slowly as his shaking arms would allow. His legs swung, feet touching just air. The moment he was certain he'd made a horrible mistake, he felt the rock press against his shoe. The space was squat enough that if Caden stood, his hair would poke out the top. But that also meant that the tunnel was so small, he had to hunch over or hit his head against the stone ceiling. He fumbled for a match and then for the candle he'd been too afraid to light earlier. He felt another presence with him as he struck the match. Not because of any super sense, but from his healer's instincts, telling him there was someone in pain close by. He spotted Linus a few feet from the opening, his body slumped in a heap against the cave wall, sitting, but like he didn't have the energy to hold himself up. He was completely naked and bleeding from claw marks that split his mud-caked skin. Caden knew now why the hunting party had sounded so riled up. Someone had found him, but somehow he'd escaped. "Those fucking assholes! I'm sorry, Linus. I'm so sorry. These injuries were outside of the scope of his training. If he only had superficial wounds, he wouldn't have been barely moving, unable to even lift his head. Caden had only just started learning about triage training. But he wasn't going to do nothing. "I'll help you. Don't worry." A healer was supposed to be able to diagnose with little more than a touch. Nothing he'd experienced had felt like the first night with Axe, when Caden had used a burst of pure power to locate his pain. Though the sensations weren't ever as strong as that first time, he'd since begun to learn how to do it on command. He scanned Linus 3 times before satisfied there was nothing immediately life-threatening. But that was hardly a relief compared to the pain he was in. He had several broken and fractured bones, more claw wounds than Caden could count, and puncture marks all over his body. Caden had once feared the violent power of a shifted werewolf, and this was why. A few more seconds, and whoever had found Linus would have ripped him apart. Caden moved to the next step in his training, addressing the pain. He grabbed the tonic from his bag and helped Linus drink. The effect was instant, allowing Linus to breathe without panting as Caden tried to remember what he had to do next. He worked silently, whispering the spells he knew, and applying salve to the many puncture wounds. He needed to try to stop the bleeding and minimize the opportunity for infection to set in. "This shouldn't have happened to you. Living out here alone doesn't make you dangerous. It doesn't make you a murderer. Just easy to blame." After bandaging the worst of his wounds, Caden moved on to splinting. There was nothing to do for the broken toes. If he'd been further in his training, he would have known how to mend them. But he could wrap his ribs, knee, and elbow, and secure his 4 broken fingers. After, he gave Linus a double dose of the golden quartz elixir to help stimulate his body into healing itself. "They're so afraid, and afraid people do stupid things. I should know. Fear was what drove all of my actions since I was a child." He'd been afraid of not being loved, of being alone, of living a life always feeling rejected. "Stop hitting yourself," Linus whispered. Caden met his eye. "The scientist, that woman, Dr. Brandt. You saw her hurting herself out here, didn't you?" Relief filled his weathered face as he breathed out, "Yes." "I'm sorry it took me so long to realize. You were trying to tell me all along, but I just thought—" He'd assumed it to be mentally unwell ramblings. "Thad helped me put the pieces together, actually." He let out a breathy snort. "I guess that dick was good for something. He'd injured himself to make Axe look bad." That had only been half the equation, though. because narcissists like Thad and Dr. Brandt would have needed really good reasons to hurt themselves. They need to stand to benefit. Thad had likely been offered a deal from his parents if he helped them, while Dr. Brandt got to do the exact thing Caden had wanted, to be the hero. She had to have had help, though. Getting the note to Dr. Lectra, murdering him without anyone seeing. He really didn't want to say who he thought her accomplice was. You were just an easy target, someone they could blame without resistance. Lunar wolves already saw lone wolves as less than. I need you to come back with me, Linus. We need to explain to the Council, to Alpha Prime. But first, I have to find proof. Where did you see the doctor hurting herself? Maybe if you take me there, I can find some evidence to make them listen. Linus pushed off the cave wall, forcing Caden to slide back out of his way. Wait, not yet. You shouldn't be trying to move. I'm just a healer in training. He steadied himself, ordering Caden with a low, "Stay," before disappearing into the pure darkness of the cave. Caden chose to not take offense to being ordered like a dog. Linus was working with limited communication skills after all. He appeared a half-minute later with a dirty tan folder. Look. Caden opened the flap but didn't know what he was looking at. There were too many unfamiliar symbols and signs, but it looked mathy. Mathy and technical. Is this the portal research? The stuff they said was destroyed? There was no way the others could ignore Caden if he showed up with files of that stuff. Where did you find it? Here in this mountain? Can you take me there? No. Danger. Please. Linus blew out Caden's candle and then froze, staring out the opening of the hole. Caden heard the howls of the hunting party echo down the tunnel a second later. They weren't right outside, but somewhere up on the ledge. And Caden had already illustrated how quickly one could make that trip. Show me, Caden pleaded, his words no louder than a breath. If they tried to leave the mountain, they risked being spotted. But if they stayed where they were, there was just as good of a chance someone in a bite-first, ask-questions-later mood would track down their scents. Linus didn't have any choice other than to lead Caden deeper into the mountain. Caden missed those simpler times when he'd been bumbling through the woods. At least there he'd had a chance of avoiding the hard rocks that slammed into his knees. Linus did what he could to help, using his silver eyes to light up the shadows. But he was injured still, and Caden didn't want him to exert himself. He focused on what he'd do next instead of how much his knees hurt. If there was more research, he'd grab as much as he could carry, and then he and Linus would get out of the forest. Caden knew he'd have to hide Linus before going to the council, but only until Caden made them listen and the true criminals were arrested. All he had to do was get through the near blackness and keep himself from wondering how deep inside the mountain they were, and not picture what sort of creepy crawlies might live there. Caden stared ahead. Is that a light? Shh! Danger! When this was all over, Caden was going to donate regular time to working on Linus's communication skills. He closed his lips, but could still hear himself breathing as loud as a jet engine. How wasn't the sound echoing through the mountain? The light grew stronger, and then they went around a bend, and Caden had to blink, it was so bright. He stood at the opening of a small cavern. The light he'd seen had come from several lanterns, lit and hung along the walls. There was a large tent, the entry flap left open where Caden spotted a raised cot and piles of blankets. Empty bottles of gin, magazines, and food and candy wrappers littered the rock around a fire pit in the center of the cavern. Directly in front of them, several large plastic totes had been stacked against the wall, and all the missing pieces from Caden's idea fell into place. "Need leave," Linus rasped, the trek seeming to have taken a lot out of him. "We will. I just need something to take back." He rushed forward, flipped open the first lid, and let it clatter to the stone as he stared at the contents within. Caden lifted a clear plastic bag full of flash drives that had been sitting on the top of what must have been decades of research. There were thick folders and journals, even a computer. Had she transported it all from the lab to here? How? He didn't need to answer that question to understand why. She's been here for weeks, glamping as she waited for the perfect moment, while the city feared the worst. I'd hardly call being trapped in this shithole glamping. Caden whirled around as Linus's growl bounced off the cavern walls. Brant stood in front of a narrow opening in the stone, opposite from where they'd entered. This had not been part of Caden's idea. It was too risky for Brant to return to the scene, unless... He spotted the gas can in her hand. "You came to destroy the evidence and finish framing Linus." "You aren't as stupid as you look," Brant sneered as she glanced from Caden to Linus, sizing them up. If Linus hadn't been injured, she probably would have already turned tail down the crack in the wall she'd scurried out of. "And I had no idea how helpful you were. I was just going to burn the place down and then let the hunting party spot the smoke. By the time they found the way inside, the evidence would be destroyed, and I'd be able to say that, yes, I think maybe he did keep me restrained somewhere dark and cold. You think I was in the caves?" she added with mock fear widening her eyes. "But now they'll also find the charred bodies. The culprit and the former chief's intended, whose only crime was to be too trusting." She stuck out her lips in a pout and mimed wiping a tear. "You're a monster." "A monster?" she laughed. "You think I'm a monster? I just want what I'm due, witch." "What you're due?" Caden parroted, only half paying attention while his mind raced for an idea. "You were Dr. Lecter's second in command, his assistant. You were already going to get recognition." "Right," she drawled, letting the word drip from her mouth. "Recognition as Tristania Brandt, the girl who slept with the former Alpha to get her position. Aren't you? You did sleep with the former Alpha to get this position," Caden drawled. She snarled. "Yes, but I won't let myself be known for that. Now I'll be Dr. Tristania Brandt, the scientist who fought her captor, a beacon of hope who led our people home." "And all you had to do was murder your mentor." "I haven't killed anyone. Yet." She upended the can, and the liquid poured from the spout, flowing down the rocks and streams to where Caden stood in front of the totes. He jumped out of the way, narrowly avoiding being soaked with gasoline from being added to his list of issues to deal with. Linus jumped with him, but his legs gave out when he landed. Brant produced a lighter from her pocket and flicked it, dropping the tiny flame before Caden had a chance to scream for her to stop. Weren't villains supposed to do more monologuing? Caden really could have used that time before the gas lit in streams that coalesced into a blaze at the lowest point of the room, where the totes were. "No!" Caden needed evidence. He needed to be able to bring something back. His word wouldn't be enough. The council had shown that already. He needed the bag of flash drives still in his hands. "When we get out of this, we're working on your situational awareness." He looped his arm around Linus, trying to help the man to his feet. Black smoke had already begun to pour from the totes as the fire spread to the tent. The smell of melting plastic made Caden's nose burn. There was almost no ventilation inside the cramped space, and if he didn't get them out of there, they'd die of smoke inhalation long before the flames reached them. Not to mention how horrible burning plastic was for the environment. Focus, Caden. Worry about your carbon footprint later. Caden took a step toward the tunnel and toppled forward, the beast at his back swiping her claws from shoulder to shoulder. He tried to scream, but just coughed as burning pain exploded across his backside. Linus growled, and then the pressure was gone, allowing Caden to skitter to his feet. The doctor's wolf squared off with Linus, still in human form. He was double the size of Brant, but it looked like he'd used all the energy he'd restored to rip the wolf off Caden. He wouldn't last long, especially not being able to shift. Caden shoved the plastic bag in his back pocket and then lunged for the first weapon he could find. Gripping the piece of firewood like a baseball bat, he wound his arms back and swung, hitting the wolf's muzzle. Caden reached again for Linus, now bleeding from several of the places Caden had already bandaged. But before his hands reached the old man, Caden was airborne. He landed at least 15 feet away, stopping only once he'd reached the wall and slammed into a hanging lantern. Shards of glass rained on him as he dropped and gasped for air. The little that he could suck in burnt his throat, the smoke now thick enough it began to obscure his vision. "Where the fuck have you been?" Brant croaked. She took the shirt Captain Mistus handed her, draping it around her body while blood poured from her temple. "I had to lead them away. They'd caught the old man's scent," he grunted. "What the fuck is going on here?" "Me tying up every loose end. No thanks to you," she snapped. Caden watched their exchange as though he was watching a television program. None of it seemed real, not while his head pounded and his vision was blurry, the impact seeming to have knocked his eyeballs loose. Then, the captain's gaze narrowed on him, and Caden knew he wasn't watching this happen from any safe place. He was in this nightmare. He struggled to his feet as the captain stalked closer. Everything was spinning. He hurt all over, and was more scared than he'd ever been in his life. Probably because he'd never been in more danger than he was right then. Mistus loomed over him. His mouth moved, but Caden had to blink to hear the sounds. "Make this city mine. Any last words, witch?" Last words? "I love you, Axe?" No, that wouldn't mean anything uttered in front of this monster. Besides, he wouldn't give up hope on saying that to Axe's face, even if he was almost surely about to die. "I'm sorry?" He couldn't say that either. He didn't know what exactly he'd be apologizing for. In the end, there was only one thing Caden knew to say. He opened his mouth and screamed with everything he had, the sound bursting from his throat, sounding nothing like a frightened man, but a terrified goat. Chapter 23. Indemnity. Axe kept his thoughts confined to following the trail. Caden's scent evolved the longer they followed it. Pain and fear seeping into the sweet lemon and stoking the fires of Axe's rage. He'd fallen, a lot, and the deeper he'd gotten into the forest, the more adrenaline that laced the trail. Because he was being chased? No. Those were the thoughts Axe wasn't allowing. They wouldn't assist him, just take away focus that he needed to find Caden. Not far now. His scent was fresher. They were close, and a whole hell of a lot closer than he'd been in that cell. He clenched his jaw to keep from roaring at the anger igniting his nerve endings. Caden had gone toward the mountain and toward the hunting party, making enough noise in the distance that every forest creature knew they were there. "Chief!" Huxley paused a little way ahead, nose in the air. "Smoke!" Axe smelled it too, but he couldn't see it yet. It was dark out, and the scent was distant. And strange. Not tarry like if it had been wood burning. What else would be burning in the forest? He pivoted toward the smell, and his gut clenched at the added danger threatening his mate. Axe didn't stop to survey the way. He plunged down the drop-off, using the side of his boot to skid over the dirt and loose rock. His team landed beside him, facing the mountain that made up the boundary of solar territory on the other side. It was damn near impassable, prone to slides and sudden drops where the rock had thinned above the system of caves within. "The smoke is coming from inside." Sai scanned the rocky ledges. "How do we search a whole fucking mountain?" Axe would turn over every stone if that was what it took. But the fear gripping his heart told him Caden didn't have that sort of time. "We can split into sections. Form a search grid," Huxley offered. Before Axe could reply, an unearthly scream echoed from within, the sound reverberating as though the mountain itself shouted for help. "What the hell is that?" Zane asked. "A dying Sasquatch?" "If you ever feel like you're in danger while I'm not around, just scream. I will find you." "That's Caden." Axe closed his eyes, visualizing the path of the fading echoes, of the scream that meant his mate was in danger. Caden was somewhere behind all that rock, calling out for his mate's protection. There wasn't time to search. Axe needed to find him now. He'd spent his life ignoring his wolf, but Caden had taught him that there were times his wolf was the only thing he needed to listen to. And right then, the beast told him to go to the right, where the echoes had faded the quickest. He searched as he ran, looking for an entry point large enough for a human body to pass through. There were no more screams, just the one that now echoed only in Axe's head. One scream meant his mate hadn't been able to scream a second time. Caden's scent slammed into him, pure and fresh and pained. He snarled on his next inhale, the scent of Caden's blood filling his senses. Using his claws, he clambered up the rock toward two large stones resting against each other. Without a second thought, he dropped into the narrow hole, clipping his hip against the edge before landing in a smoke-filled tunnel. His team followed, their breaths as quiet as their boots against the stone. But it was the sounds ahead Axe focused on. 4 heartbeats, one of them familiar and 2 fucking slow. Axe didn't concern himself with stealth. He ripped around a bend in the tunnel that brought him to the chaos of the cavern. There was fire and movement, but Axe saw only Caden, motionless and flat on his back, with Captain Mistus's hands around his throat. The captain looked up a split second later, shock registering before he let go and fell back, rambling. "Chief, your mate was a spy. He conspired with the lone—" Axe roared, wolf and man in perfect unison, as he sent his clawed hand into the captain's chest. He grabbed hold of his sternum and ripped it free, the crunching barely audible over the captain's garbled screams. Axe dropped the bloody bone, edged with jagged shards of cartilage, and plunged his hand inside the gaping hole. He snagged the captain's heart with his claws and yanked the organ, still beating, from his worthless body. Screams echoed off the walls, female, and of no concern to Axe as he whirled to his mate. There was a low, "Holy shit," from one of his agents overhead, but Axe paid them no mind, scooping Caden into his arms. "Baby, Caden, baby, wake up." He wasn't dead. His pulse was slow but present. His wheezing breaths whistled, too shallow, too labored. How long had it taken Axe to find him after he'd screamed? Almost long enough for Caden to die. He's still alive. Axe grasped onto that fact as he turned back toward the tunnel. "Huxley, Zane, follow me with Linus, and Brant, but leave the body. Sai, take what you can from the fire." Axe ordered over his shoulder. If Caden had risked his life to come here, Axe wouldn't let it be for nothing. His wolf sat back, satisfied for now that the immediate threat had been destroyed. But close enough to the surface, his agents recognized the need to keep their distance as they raced through the tunnel, up the drop-off, and back through the forest. In the distance, the hunting party howled, drawn nearer by the black smoke that had started billowing from the hole. Axe held Caden tight enough he wouldn't jostle as he pushed his body as fast as he could move. If he didn't get Caden to help before the werewolves caught up with them, there would be more bloodshed. "Hold on, baby. I'm going to get you to Martha. She's going to fix you up." Caden's chest rattled with each shallow breath, pain radiating from him like heat from an engine. There was no end to it. Battered and bruised, he had cuts on his head and face. Finger marks were forming around his throat, standing out starkly among the love bites already present. The hideous impostors were proof another man had touched his mate, had tried to kill his mate. Axe savored the memory of the captain's struggling heart, beating as though trying to escape his grip. His only wish was that he'd made the pain last longer. There hadn't been time. Already, Caden's pulse was a little slower. He wasn't getting enough air. Axe loosened his grip and lowered his face, scent marking his mate as gingerly as he could. Brant coughed and screamed from over the top of Zane's shoulder. The show she'd given the day before had fooled even him, but not Caden. He'd known the lone wolf wasn't responsible and hadn't let himself be swayed, not even when his own mate failed to come to his defense. Never had Axe felt so proud or panicked. What if he never got the chance to say he was sorry? "Help me! Help me!" Brant screeched with coughing cries the moment they'd entered the city. "They're murderers! Help me!" "She's ready for us at headquarters," Huxley called out, slipping his phone in his pocket before repositioning the lone wolf on his shoulder. Brant's screams drew out every werewolf within hearing, their curious faces watching while they wisely remained out of the way as Axe and his team burst through the headquarters entrance. Martha was there, along with everyone else. Ferris stood with his Landry reps. Alia's worried gaze checked on her son before frowning at Caden. Axe dropped to his knees and draped his mate over his arms, unable to set him down even for Martha to tend to his injuries. She said nothing to them as she worked around Axe, spreading her palms out over Caden's body as she whispered. She reached into her bag, grabbing a curved glass bottle. Popping the cork with her thumb, she turned the bottle over the top of Caden's face and poured shimmering purple liquid over his eyes, nose, and mouth. "Restrain Axe Landry and his agents immediately," Ferris bellowed, red-faced as Officer Gunners surged forward with 5 patrol guards. Axe's throat vibrated with his snarl. His eyes flashed silver at his wolf's eager whisper. "Let them try." Caden stirred and Axe pushed back his bloodthirsty desires. He needed to stay calm for his mate. Zane let the struggling Dr. Brandt drop from his shoulder. She scurried into the arms of the nearest solar guard while Zane and Huxley formed a protective wall in front. Cy stood at his back, growling at the gawking bystanders. "Is this a mutiny? Take them all, I don't care!" Ferris's high-pitched screams bounced off the walls of the lobby. "Hold!" Alpha Might didn't holler as Ferris had, but her command rang with a level of authority his had lacked. Officer Gunner stilled, looking from Ferris to Alpha Might, and then finally to Director Might, who scowled but nodded. "What do you mean, hold?" Ferris spun to face Alpha Might. "This man attacked his Alpha, and then, with the help of his former agents, escaped from the cell provided to me by this city. Together, they assaulted multiple members of Crescent City Patrol, including Officer Gunner, as well as my representatives. I understand your desire for an investigation, but this is going too far." "Alpha Landry," Alia began, a serene expression on her face. "I did not just desire an investigation. I've performed one and have come to a conclusion. One I would be happy to inform you of once the chief's mate is well enough to join us. If you'd like to wait in the meeting room, it's this way." She gestured down the hallway. "I'm not waiting," Ferris snarled. "This disrespect will not be tolerated." He charged toward Alia, but stopped as Freston, moving faster than an eye could track, inserted his body between them. His hands hung loosely at his side, the playful mate gone, exchanged with a deadly kinetic. "Freston?" Alia frowned, though she couldn't hide the smile in her eyes. He backed up, rejoining her side as Alia lifted her attention to Axe and his team. "How is he? Mother?" She'd been working steadily, using so many different potions and ointments. Their empty bottles covered the tile around them. "There's evidence of manual strangulation, multiple bruises, swelling, and lacerations of varying depths. Subconjunctival hemorrhaging in his right eye and damage to his lungs and throat due to smoke inhalation." Martha listed through a tight throat. Axe let each of her words enter him like a knife. "I'm okay," Caden mumbled with a voice like metal grinding over asphalt. He opened his eyes, peered up at Axe's face, and smiled, as much as he was able to with his swollen lips. Axe cursed at his blood-red eye. "Shh, don't try to talk yet. Martha is almost done." Caden tried to turn his head to the room, but Martha tisked him, so he brought his gaze back to Axe, croaking, "You heard me scream." "Hard not to," Zane commented over his shoulder. "Sounded like a cat in heat being forced into a bathtub." Caden tried to laugh at that, earning Zane dual looks of disapproval from Axe and Martha. "Who did this?" Alia asked, addressing her question to no single person. Axe tore his gaze from his mate. "Captain Mistus. That is whose blood is on my arm. He had his hands around Caden's neck, so I tore his heart from his body." There was no reason to sugarcoat his actions. The hunting party would have already found the cavern, and what was left of the solar wolf. Caden realized Dr. Brandt and the captain were attempting to frame the lone wolf for the crimes they committed. He went into the forest to save him and clear his name. "They're liars!" Brandt shouted from behind the solar guards. "The captain found them in possession of stolen portal research and tried to stop them from burning it all. He's a hero!" Liar, Caden croaked. "Why would either of us sabotage our own people?" Brandt continued as though Caden hadn't spoken. I want to help us go home. I would never do anything to jeopardize that. They had copies of all of our research. I saw it with my own eyes. How? Alpha Prime asked, his single word making the doctor take a step back. She blinked, as though confused by the question. How? Or maybe the better question is, why? What exactly were you doing there, Dr. Brandt? Her mouth gaped open like a lying fish. I don't give a shit about any of this, Ferris announced. This level of bumbling misconduct would never happen on Landry territory. I demand you release Axe to me immediately. And then I'll be thinking carefully about the Landry Pack continuing to offer support for this experiment of a city. Axe refused to let Caden be taken from him again. The whole city would have to try. Alia shook her head. Axe will not be required to return with you. I've concluded, and confirmed with Director Might, that while challenges for Alpha don't typically occur outside of Pack lands, one may, if the challenge is accepted by the participating Alpha, as well as the Alpha responsible for the territory. Axe's challenge occurred on Might territory, and I accepted it. Did you, Alpha Landry? Director Might looked as sullen as Axe had ever seen him, while his daughter's expression was just this side of roguish. Challenge? Ferris stammered. Attacking Ferris had been a challenge, but not one Axe had made with the goal of ruling in his stead. But a challenge truly only needed to have lethal intent, and Axe had been ready to kill his cousin. For Ferris to refuse a challenge, he was declaring, without saying the words, that he believed himself too weak to have come out the victor. He had to accept, or Axe would be the least of his worries when he returned. The challenges would pour in as wolves across the country heard of his weakness. Yes, Ferris bit out. Alia clasped her hands together. Then it's clear. There was no attack, just an interrupted challenge. If you would like to wait in the meeting room, we can discuss a time for the challenge to continue, without interference. Ferris stomped down the hallway, Raquel skipping to keep up with his angry strides. Alia waited for him to pass before following with Director Might, 4 of the Lunar Council members, Gloria, Alpha Prime, and his solar guards, escorting Brandt. The others in the lobby shuffled out, either down the hallway or through the side exits, as Martha asked, "Can you sit up, dear?" Axe wasn't ready for him to be out of his arms, but he let Caden try. He still looked like he'd been run over, but he was able to brace his weight on his palms as he slowly turned his head, and his bruised face frowned. Linus. The lone wolf lay against the tile breathing, but unconscious. He'll get a sedative so he can rest well, while another healer can finish tending to him, Martha said. Though it looks like you already did most of the work. And after? His voice was like sandpaper, and it took all Axe had not to growl at his bloody eye as he gave them a pleading gaze. When the healers give the go-ahead, I'll have him dropped off on the forest edge with food and water. He wouldn't be comfortable waking up within the city, Axe said. I'll make sure it happens, Huxley added. Axe looked up at his team. Each one of them had risked their position within the city to help him, and it shamed Axe to realize that a month ago he wouldn't have thought that possible. Thank you. Sai grunted and nodded, clearly uncomfortable with the gratitude, while the other 2 grinned. "Aww," Caden rasped. Now hug. Zane opened his arms, freezing at the deadly look in Sai's eye. He laughed. I saw my snake of a father slither down the hallway. I'll go first, make sure he isn't hissing into anyone's ear. Martha finished her care with a handful more quietly muttered spells, and one last pain-relieving tonic. Only then did she let Caden try to stand. He could, but Axe wasn't ready to let him, carrying him instead to the packed meeting room. So many were in attendance. There weren't enough chairs, a few bodies already standing along the walls. Alia gestured toward the 3 remaining chairs, and Axe took one, pulling Caden so close he practically sat on Axe's lap while Martha took the 3rd. Axe didn't want to subject his mate to the scrutiny of werewolves whose opinions didn't matter, not when it came to their bond. But Caden deserved the chance to tell them what he'd discovered. If Alia thought their seating arrangement odd, she hid it well. First, I'd like to say how sorry I am about your grandfather, Caden. My mother tells me he was a devoted family man, and a loss to the witch community. Axe squeezed his hand, more eager now to take Caden back to their house where he could hold him and let his mate talk as much or as little as he wanted about his grandpa and all that had happened while Axe had been in a cell. He felt Caden's stiff inhale press his spine into Axe's chest. Thank you. It was, there when I realized, or thought I realized, what had really happened. He wasn't on the brink of death, but he still sounded and looked like hell, and Axe's wolf paced, clawing at his brain with each step. Caden didn't owe these people anything, certainly nothing that would cause him more pain. But that quiet strength Axe loved shone through Caden's words and kept Axe silent. It was Thad, actually, and the fact that he either beat himself up or had someone else do it, because my mate didn't. His voice went hard, his glare on Ferris and Raquel sitting on the other end of the table. Neither dared interrupt, not with an unfinished challenge dangling over their heads. Caden continued to explain what he suspected regarding Dr. Brandt's self-inflicted injuries. That isn't true! Alpha Prime's growl silenced Brandt, shrieking. If she interrupts again, gag her. Dr. Brandt and Officer Mista staged her kidnapping. They destroyed the lab, making sure Axe's team couldn't investigate the scene, and then later murdered Dr. Lectra, clearing the way for Dr. Brandt to return the hero. I don't know if the doctor was murdered in front of our house, or if it was also staged, but I believe the intent was to rile my mate and sow uncertainty. If you don't believe me, then go to the cave. You'll find a gas can with her prints on it and several empty bottles of gin, which just so happened to be the doctor's favorite. Caden added, his unblinking stare pinning Brandt in place. Alpha Prime's expression grew stonier by the word. His eyes burned golden as he took in Brandt weeping silently. She had no defense. Her presence alone was damning. I stood by and allowed an innocent man to be punished. I'm so sorry, Caden. If he is agreeable, I'd like to extend an apology and my full support to the lone wolf, Linus. I understand he lives outside the city by his own choice, but if there is something I can do to make that existence easier, I will. He looked to his guards. Escort Tristania Brandt to the containment unit on solar territory. I can assure each of you in this room, she will be punished for the crimes against my people and the city. Chief Landry. Ferris sat stick straight, refusing to look at Axe as he spoke. My cousin is no longer my chosen representative. I'll be sending a new representative, one who has already fulfilled his duty to the sacred pact in a way that upholds its... Forgive me, but are you positive you'll be Alpha at that time? Gloria's eyes were wide with an innocent confusion that was neither real nor innocent. I was under the assumption there was an active challenge. Raquel shot the woman daggers that might as well have been feathers for how much they affected her. Axe was ready to spill his cousin's blood on the table, until Caden wrenched his head around, capturing his gaze with one of apprehension, reminding Axe that all of his choices would affect Caden as well. I revoke my challenge. For now. Caden visibly relaxed, and even as his beast howled, Axe knew he'd made the right choice. The temptation to finish what he'd started was strong. He'd entertained the idea years ago when he'd been younger and angrier. At that time, he'd known that Ferris would never allow a fair challenge, but mostly, Axe didn't want to rule over a pack who'd shunned him. Their rejection had formed enough of who he was. He wouldn't allow them to influence any more of him. I accept. Ferris's outburst was met with snickers from around the room. And no longer claim him as a Landry packmate. He is a lone wolf, which still makes him ineligible to hold the position. Caden sank into him, rubbing his hair against Axe's chin in support. Those words had haunted Axe for so long, and yet hearing them now made him feel nothing. Alpha Prime cleared his throat. I'd like to offer Axe and Caden positions within the Solar Wolf Pack. I'd be proud to call each a packmate. They've done my people a great service, and have made me realize I should have already scrutinized those appointed to positions of power while my father was in charge. Could a lunar wolf join the Solar Pack? There was no precedence for Axe to follow. Director Might shook his head. The Lunar Council doesn't permit wolves to join packs outside of their species. Yet, Aelia added with a mischievous gleam that made Director Might frown. But I'm not going to argue that right now, because I'd be honored for the Chief and Caden to be a part of the Might Pack. But only a Landry representative can be Chief! Ferris's face turned the same color as a ripe tomato. Acting as an official member of the Lunar Council, I move to retain Axe Landry as Chief of the Lunar Council Enforcement Agency. Martha's smile matched her daughter's. The two were enjoying this moment. The role should be held by a citizen of the city, which I believe Axe is in every sense of the word. He's an example of what Crescent City can become. An example? Are you all forgetting he paid for his mate? Raquel asked stiffly. Martha leveled her with a cool stare. I was granted the opportunity to hear the full story from Caden's lips. If anything, Chief Landry has proven to our people that no matter the intent, the sacred pact brings together witches and werewolves that should be together. He has set an example to the city and has brought in a talented, competent healer who not only saw a fellow witch through his end of life, but healed a badly beaten werewolf with nothing but a beginner's kit and a few spells. I don't condone his frivolous use of dragon's dust. Caden squirmed in Axe's lap. But I believe Crescent City is lucky to have him as a citizen. I second the motion to retain Axe as chief, Aelia announced. Third, Gloria followed. Ferris launched to his feet, the tendons in his neck sticking out as he stretched over the table and stared Martha down. Do you think I will stand aside as nepotism rules this city? You're all related to one another through birth or blood, or maybe both. Sit down, Alpha Landry. Director Might's unblinking gaze pinned Ferris like a spear. He fell onto his chair, his face blanching beneath the director's cold intent. The director was no fan of Axe's. He had his own reasons to want to see the city fail, but his devotion to his mate outweighed everything else. The motion has passed. It will be officially voted on during the next briefing. And since the challenge has been resolved, I see no other reason for us to linger. Perhaps, Alpha Landry, you should return to your territory and allow the council time to wonder if this city requires its Landry representatives. Ferris stood, holding his hand out to his mate, but Raquel just stared at it, her sour expression communicating exactly what she thought of how the situation had turned out. The Landry reps left with them, leaving everyone else to stare expectantly at Axe and Caden. Neither of them had spoken a word while the others had gone to bat, ensuring they both had positions within the city and pack. Axe rubbed his palms down Caden's arms, knowing he wouldn't enjoy the scrutiny. Alpha Might, Martha, I am honored by the offer, but I need time to think over if being the chief is the right thing for us. What? Caden yelped with so much force he bounced in Axe's lap. Are you kidding me, Axe? Axe's face warmed as he ignored the amused stares and rolled his chair back from the table, brushing Caden's honey hair out of his eyes and off his forehead. I want to do what is right for you, Caden. Forcing you into a life you didn't ask for is a mistake I'll make only once. My home is where you are, and I only want to live where you are happy. The outrage turned into sunshine as Caden's face lit up. That place is here, Axe, with you in Crescent City. He turned, wiggling in his lap in a way that could rapidly become a problem if they didn't get home soon. Caden met Alia's eye, the two smiling. He accepts. Chapter 24. Resolution. By the time they were able to return home, the pain-relieving tonics had worn off, and Caden hurt all over. He tried not to hiss as Axe set him down on the sofa. Thankfully, Martha had given him a few bottles from her kit since Caden had used all of his on hand, and didn't think he had the strength to replenish his supplies. Unfortunately, they were in the bag currently on the coffee table, which was theoretically within reach, if Caden thought he could move. Almost dying was exhausting. Axe returned in the next minute with a familiar folder in his hand. He sat down across from Caden, pulled the original copy of their contract out of the folder, and used his werewolf strength to tear the thick stack of paper right down the middle. What? Caden's upper half shot up as he lunged for the contract. What are you doing? His face burned, emotion clogging his throat. He knew logically that Axe probably hadn't decided that since their secret was out, he didn't want him anymore. But that contract had been the thing that had brought them together. Axe let the torn pieces drift to the coffee table. No requirements, no threats, no rules. I don't want to make you become my mate. I don't want to tell you how to live. I love you and claimed you as my mate in my heart a long time ago. But this needs to be your choice, one you've made freely, without duress or coercion. Axe, don't be silly. Caden blinked back his confused tears. We both stopped caring about that thing a long time ago. Is this because everyone else found out? I don't care what they think about us. It isn't because of that, Caden. He understood then, as Axe's gaze dropped. Why, he needed to hear him say the words. With Axe, Caden finally felt like he belonged, and it just occurred to him that Axe might have felt the same way. He needed to hear Caden choose him, and not because he was after a big payday. He lifted his arms, and Axe gently slid him into his lap, letting Caden rest his head on Axe's chest. "My life is with you." Axe's ribs lifted as he let out a low sigh. "You also could have started with that, instead of coming out here like a paper shredder and giving me a heart attack." Axe rubbed slow circles into his back. "I'm sorry. I have no more surprises. We need to get you healed. Can't have my mate wincing at the ceremony as he walks toward me. Let me get you another pain reliever." Caden hummed and shook his head. "Your hands are doing the trick, especially if you go lower and nakeder." Axe laughed. "Oh no, Caden Borealis. I refuse to let you do anything too strenuous. Heal first, then we go lower and nakeder." He was joking, right? The last time Caden stood on a stage across from Axe, the day didn't go as planned. That had been a week ago, and the days since were little more than a whirlwind. After Alpha Prime made a deal to remove death as a punishment, Brant had confessed to everything she and the former captain had done. Though every solar wolf Caden had spoken to had told him she'd end up wishing for death's sins instead. She was sentenced to a future all solar wolves feared, a life without the sun. She now lived in darkness or artificial light, and would for the rest of her life. She'd told them where to find the remaining portal research, and Dr. Jelani was confident that with it, and the materials Psi had pulled out before they could burn, she'd be able to continue construction of the portal. The only delays now came from the change in personnel, as Alpha Prime vetted each of his officials. Both Brant and Mistus had been appointed by the previous Alpha, and from what Caden had heard, the man hadn't been as concerned with things like honesty and integrity. Alpha Prime wouldn't make the mistake of blindly trusting those officials again. Caden had learned from his mistakes as well. The moment he'd stepped onto the raised platform, he'd found Axe on the other side, and he refused to look away. He didn't bother even looking at the guests, many more than had attended the first time, or even Alia standing behind the podium at the middle of the stage, reading the words that would begin their mating ceremony. Axe looked like he had the same plan. Whether he also intended for his gaze to set Caden's nerve endings on fire was uncertain. Though, if Caden was being honest, it would have been more difficult for his werewolf to look at him in a way that didn't turn him on, especially after it had turned out that Axe hadn't been joking. Repeat each pledge while taking a step forward, beginning the journey of your lives together. Alia paused before continuing. I take your heart as my heart. Caden let the words tumble from his lips and took a step 3 times the size of his normal gait. There was a gentle laughter from the crowd, but Caden wouldn't look away until he was in Axe's arms. Axe arched his brow, smirking as he repeated the next vow. My strength is your strength. Oh, and what a strength it was. Caden bit his lip, imagining the delicious things his mate did with his strength as he took another big step, nearly halfway across the stage already. Your joy is my blessing. He had to take baby steps now, but didn't care, since that meant Axe was already within touching distance. My beast belongs to you. Only Axe repeated that pledge, though Caden still took a step. There was a beast inside him. A horny one that was furious Axe had refused to knot him the entire week, saying he wouldn't risk harming Caden while he was still healing. He wouldn't even listen when Caden tried explaining his knot would heal him. But the week was over, and Axe had promised. Axe's chest rumbled and brought Caden out of his head, where he'd been too lost to realize he was staring directly at his mate's dick. On stage. In front of everyone. He grinned, shrugging as though it couldn't be helped. Alia continued, voice bouncing with amusement. I promise to protect and nurture our bond. I promise to protect and nurture our bond. Caden blinked back the tears threatening to form. He didn't want anything obscuring his focus. He needed to stay alert and aware. It wasn't like what happened last time could happen again. But that just opened the door for new bullshit to try and keep Caden from claiming his mate. Because you are my mate. Alia stepped back, giving Axe and Caden space to exist where it could be just the two of them. Because... Caden took the final step, bringing the tips of their toes together. His heart was ready to burst, excitement and arousal all zipping around him on a roller coaster of happiness. You are my mate. Relief spread across Axe's face, followed quickly by a heated look that made Caden gulp. Are you ready? Axe whispered. Caden knew what came next. What he didn't know was why Axe was wasting precious time he could be using giving Caden his bite. He didn't care if it hurt. The pain wouldn't compare to the helplessness he'd felt when he thought this would all be taken away from him. Axe chuckled like he could read Caden's thoughts on his face before murmuring, What a good boy you are. Caden gasped. That was cheating. Axe wasn't allowed to say that here, where Caden's boner would be impossible to repress in front of a crowd of... Axe sank his teeth into the soft skin of his nape. There was only a slight sting. Caden hadn't had time to tense, too busy thinking about his erection. He hissed, but almost immediately, it transformed into a moan of pleasure. To hell with going hard. Caden was seconds from orgasming where every single one of his friends and new family could see. Axe released him, licking the spot clean, and quite frankly, making the orgasm situation much worse. He stopped just as Caden whimpered, dancing so close to the edge he nearly flung himself off it. Mate, Axe whispered. This wasn't the first time he'd been called that, but it was the first time there was no tightness in Axe's tone, no hint of a question mark. It was a declaration, a stated fact. The guests erupted, cheering and howling as Caden laughed, letting Axe swing him off his feet and into his arms. Axe carried Caden into the crowd. There was no neat line of well-wishers, but a mob of people yelling out their congratulations. They followed them out of the mating hall and down the road to Alpha Mite's house. She'd offered to host their reception as a welcome gift to the pack. Caden still thought she was the one who needed gifted. Thanks to her, Axe had been a lone wolf for all of 2 minutes. His werewolf was still adjusting to the change, and to the fact that one day Huxley would be his alpha. The teasing had already begun with the team, but it was Huxley who seemed the most embarrassed by it. Their happy parade continued down the street, and as Caden got his first look of the house, he gasped. They'd set out picnic tables in the grass in front of the house, Their white linen tablecloths swayed in the gentle breeze along with the paper lanterns strung up around the tables, and then continuing across the deck. The front door was wide open, giving Caden a peek of the tables of food set out buffet-style inside the dining room. Axe hugged him close. "You aren't disappointed? This isn't too different from the parties you used to go to?" Caden snorted, unable to remember what the appeal had ever been. Everything about his life before had been a distraction, a way for Caden to ignore the screaming troll inside him that demanded he realize who he truly was. "I love it. Every part of it." He watched the corner of the yard where a group of werewolves had grabbed hold of their instruments and started playing. Caden wiggled in Axe's arms, nipping his ear as he whispered, "I especially love that I'm going to get a chance to see more of those wicked, not old man moves." Axe's growl vibrated through him. They took a seat at the table marked, "For the new mates," as the rest of the guests streamed in. Not everyone had been able to fit inside the meeting hall, but the whole city was invited to the reception, and Caden was beginning to realize just how many of its citizens he hadn't met. Caden had invited Linus as well, but while he'd acted a little more human since everything, he still wasn't ready to be around so many people. And since Alpha Prime had gifted him with a small log cabin deep in the woods, he'd had even less of a reason to leave. "Who are they?" Caden gestured to a group of witches looking at him with hopeful expressions. "That's..." Axe stiffened. "I don't know. My team is working security. If they're here, they've been cleared." Caden got to his feet, Axe following behind as he approached the small group. He thought he maybe recognized a few of them, including the old witch standing at the front. His heavily wrinkled face watched Caden as he approached. Caden had learned enough about werewolves and witches to know that when one of them looked old, it meant they likely had an age 3 digits long. "Hi, thanks for coming to my..." "Holy shit!" Axe snorted. Caden hadn't meant to curse, but he'd been mid-sentence when he'd realized why a few of them looked familiar. Martha rushed forward, flushed but clearly excited. "Oh dear, I was going to do the introductions." Caden barely looked at her. He wasn't trying to be rude, but he felt like if he looked away, the entire group might vanish. "You look like my grandpa," Caden said to the slightly younger of the two men. "You both do. Are you..." The older of the two stepped forward. "Hello, Caden. I'm sorry it's taken me this long to finally meet you. My name is Titus Borealis. I'm your great-grandfather." He held out his hand, but it drooped as the seconds passed without Caden taking it. "My son's caretaker explained the situation. She informed me my son had died." Titus coughed, clearing the emotion making his throat tight. "And told me that the Borealis clan had grown. When my son left, when his clan failed to protect him, he cut off all contact. I had no idea my grandson had welcomed a son." Welcomed was a bit of an overstatement, but Caden didn't correct him. He was still deciding if he believed the man. His regret felt real, but what had kept them from reaching out all this time? Finding Caden's family wouldn't have been that difficult, not unless they'd felt too much shame to try. And while Caden didn't know how they could have acted as they had in the past, he understood shame. Axe squeezed his hand in silent support. Titus continued, a light blush creeping up his neck. "I apologize. I should have waited until it wasn't your mating day. We'll go. Submit new travel documents for a time when you've had a chance to decide if you'd like to." Caden took his hand, shaking it for a second before it turned into a hug. "Don't go. You'll miss the party." He pulled away and looped his arm inside of Axe's, pride bubbling inside him. "This is my mate, Axe Landry." "We've heard of you, Chief," Titus said. Axe went still. "We had our doubts about this city and its mission until you took charge. If Caden allows it, we'd like to revisit the prospect of sending witches to represent the Borealis clan within Crescent City. But I don't wish to put Caden on the spot right now. Those decisions can be made later." Axe exhaled softly. "Thank you. The Lunar Council makes the final decision. I can assist you in petitioning if it ends up happening." Did he make it?" Caden had received word from Zelda that he had, but not what had happened after. She'd also sent him copies of a very confusing-looking will that, Caden learned after Axe decoded it for him, left half of his wealth to Caden, and the other half to Zelda. Caden didn't know how he felt about that, or if he'd ever decide how he felt, but he was glad Zelda would be taken care of for the rest of her life. Titus gave a solemn nod. "He holds a place of honor inside the Borealis clan mausoleum, beside his wife. Our clan, we weren't what we are now. That isn't an excuse, but a confession. We failed to protect your grandmother, and failed to stand by my son. I'm not asking you for forgiveness for all that happened, because we don't deserve any. But I'd like a chance to make things right from now on." Caden didn't know what that might look like, but he wasn't against finding out. He offered a smile as Zane approached, whispering something in Axe's ear that made his eyes flash angrily. "What?" Caden asked. "Your parents. They've been outside the gate for hours. They were denied entry before the ceremony, but are refusing to leave. Don't worry about it." "Just give me the word," Zane added. "I'll make them leave." Caden had known from the moment Zelda had sent him the copy of his grandpa's will that he'd see his parents again. He didn't know if they were aware today was the day of his mating ceremony, but doubted it would have changed their minds. "I'd wondered where my grandson was. He wasn't invited?" Titus asked. "No, I wanted to enjoy my day," Caden replied, making Zane snort. Something knowing settled behind Titus's gaze. "I see. So not much has changed." Caden's parents had enjoyed a lifetime of taking out their anger on him, and he'd spent that time thinking there was something he could have done to make them stop hating him. But this time, there was no panic, no raw ache in his soul where he held his hope that they'd finally be proud of him. He grabbed Axe's hand, meeting Titus's gaze as he said, "Let them in." Minutes later, his parents emerged from the patrol car that had escorted them from the gate. They no longer had free rein within the city. They took in the festivities, their expressions telling Caden they hadn't known what today was, but saw it as their lucky timing. His father's cruel smirk widened as they reached the edge of the yard. His mother spotted Axe and clutched at her husband's arm, shouting so everyone could hear, "That werewolf should be incarcerated! He put a human in the hospital and forced my son to be his mate!" Caden rolled his eyes. "That episode was on last week. No one wants to watch a repeat." She scowled, face red as she realized the party hadn't slowed at her outburst. "He's a feral beast!" Caden fanned his face, peering up at his mate. Oh, don't I know it. He didn't see who all laughed, but heard their chuckles as Axe winked down at him. "If you refuse to see how you've been brainwashed, then I wash my hands of you," his father continued. "I don't want to be around you any longer than I have to be. So, just give us our share of Dad's estate, and we can agree to never see each other again." Caden hadn't decided what he'd do with the money, but knew none of it would be going to his parents. Why would I give a single cent of Grandpa's money to his ungrateful son? The man sacrificed everything to protect you, both of you. His mother's eyes widened, her lips forming an O as she sputtered for something to say. "You have no idea how shameless you two are? You're right. I had no idea. But I do now. You let Grandpa clean up the mess you both made. He was the one who made us run instead of staying to fight. He was a coward. He could have thought of something, paid them off. Instead, he made us leave everything." Caden's father went silent, and his face paled at the sight of Titus Borealis coming to stand shoulder to shoulder with Caden. "My son's only fault was loving his son. He should have whipped your behind for the trouble you put him through, running to him to fix your problems, hiding behind your poor late mother." Titus stomped forward and grabbed Caden's parents by the ears, wrenching them away from the party. "How dare you make a scene on your son's mating day? You were a whiny, spoiled child then, and you're a whiny, spoiled child now. Both of you should be ashamed." Caden listened to his great-grandfather berate his parents until he was too far away to hear. He clasped his hands together under his chin and swung around to face Axe. "That was the best mating gift I could ever ask for. In that case, I'll return the wine." Gloria stood a few feet away with a well-dressed man beside her, holding a basket of wine. She'd told Caden that her mate would return in time for the ceremony. He'd been prepared to finally meet the man, but he wasn't prepared for the way his knees buckled when Caden realized just who that man was. Axe caught him while Gloria laughed as if people usually swooned when they met her mate. "Allow me to introduce to you my mate, Solar Wolf Alpha, Eaton Spire." Caden blinked. That wasn't this person's name. He'd know that square chin and ocean blue eyes anywhere. You're Ethan Sparrow." He tore his gaze from the world-famous actor. "Gloria, your mate is Ethan Sparrow? Ethan Sparrow is a werewolf? What? I'm your biggest fan. I saw Love Never Dies Thrice 1,000 times in the theater. You're why I wanted to get into the entertainment industry in the first place. I had a poster of you on my wall next to my bed. Oh my God!" He lunged forward, but Axe kept him in place with an arm around his middle, forcing Caden to hang over the muscled limb. "Alpha Spire," Axe grunted, squeezing Caden closer while angling his body so his mating bite faced the two of them. "Chief Landry, I've heard you had quite the excitement while I was shooting." Caden's tongue went dry. This was insane. "You know my mate?" "Ethan Sparrow knows my mate." He beamed at Axe, but his mate didn't reciprocate his joy. Axe growled. "You may call me Eaton, Caden." He flicked his gaze to Axe. "Or maybe call me Alpha Spire, so your mate doesn't beat me up. Caden's jaw dropped. I would never, ever let him do that, Mr. Alpha. Holy shit. Ethan Sparrow. I'll call you whatever you want me to. Caden mentally winced. I mean... Axe turned, lifting Caden off his feet as he dragged him away. We didn't accept their gift. Caden turned his neck as far as he could to stare back at the smiling couple. They can put it on the table with the rest. Axe grunted and carried Caden to the patch of grass where people had started to dance. I thought you wanted to see my old man moves. Unless they aren't good enough anymore. Caden wrapped his arms around Axe's waist and began to sway. Aw, my jealous honey wolf. Your old man moves are always good enough. Caden had danced for as long as his legs would allow. He'd eaten as much food as his stomach could fit, and had laughed until his throat went raw. He leaned heavily on his mate as he unlocked the front door. You're exhausted, Axe murmured. You need bed. Caden pushed upright, suddenly alert. I need dick. You have a dick, Axe laughed. I need your dick. Come on, Axe, you promised. No, not while I was healing. But I'm not healing. I'm healed. And officially mated. Technically, half your knot belongs to me. He lifted his hands to his hips and glared at the man who seemed to be finding all of this extremely funny. Then, Axe moved. Or Caden assumed he did, since one blink later the man had Caden in his arms, lips close enough to kiss. All of my knot belongs to you. Caden tilted his face back. Prove it. This concludes Pressure by Kiki Burrelli, narrated by Chris Chambers. Copyright 2022 by Kiki Burrelli. This unabridged audiobook is published by arrangement with Kiki Burrelli and was produced in the year 2023 by Tantor Media Incorporated, a division of Recorded Books, which holds the copyright thereto. Please visit Tantor.com for more information on our growing library of unabridged audiobooks.